back to Wild Wine Life on Vine Chat. We are honored to have Donald Patz, the industry veteran and titan, with us. You are originally from the upper Midwest, starting life in North Dakota. Your family moved
I
to
was only
Minnesota.
there briefly. I was there 2 days to be born and then immediately went to Minnesota. But anyway, yes, go ahead.
And then ended up in Oregon,
I did.
attending college before going down to California. Your undergrad is biology, where you worked almost every wine job after college, from sales to winemaking. You started Patz and Hall while you were at Flora Springs with James Hall, was at Honig, and a couple other partners. You have the most wonderful wife, Young Min Lee. I hope I'm saying that correctly, who happens to love Cabernet Sauvignon. You sold Patz and Hall back in 2016. You have no part in the buyback of Patz and Hall. You have your own project, Donald Patz Wine Group, that you started in 2017. That includes, and I butcher too many words and languages as it is, Maritana Vineyards, which is your Pinot Noir Chardonnay wines from the Russian River Valley. Terminim Wines, it's a co-op with Francis Villard doing Rhone wines. And Secret Door, which is your Napa Cabernet Sauvignon project. Welcome to Wild Wine Life.
Thank you. Thanks, Ray. Nice to be here.
Nice.
By the way, the pronunciation is Terminum. So
Terminum.
Terminum, yeah. So for some reason, other people like to say Terminium. I don't know. I guess they think it's sort of like kryptonite or something like that. But yeah, Terminum, and the word basically comes from the Greek god of the Roman god of borders and boundaries, Terminus, and that had already been used. So I wanted something that sounded sort of Roman as a homage to the Rhone Valley's beginnings in terms of grape growing under the Romans.
So here's my first question. You said that you started drinking wine back in the 70s. What was your road to Damascus moment that made you fall in love with wine and eventually take your biology degree into the wine industry and not the medical field?
Interesting reference to Road to Damascus. I always think of it, I hadn't really thought of it with those words, but I don't think there. I mean, there was a couple of things that happened that really sort of changed my mind about wine. But I found wine really interesting from the very beginning, um, and I one of my favorite things was Hugh Johnson's World Atlas of Wine. I read that thing until I got I think it was either the first or second edition, and it was in soft cover. And I think it basically fell apart. I had to finally throw it away. But I just found it really interesting in the whole connection between place and characteristics in the wine. Being able to look at a map and say, well, the grapes came from here, and can I surmise anything about how that wine ought to taste or why it is the way it is? That was kind of interesting. And then I had so I'm all about California. I mean, I've lived in California now for more than half my life. My entire career has been about California. So I rarely mention wines from other areas, but I have to say that I'd had quite a few Pinot Noirs. Wasn't really all that excited about them because there's a lot of reasons why in the 1970s, in particular, Pinot was a challenge in California. And I was living in Oregon, and even the Oregon Pinots were fairly light and kind of delicate, and not really that exciting at the time. I think they've really improved, by the way. But I was running a wine club in Eugene, Oregon, and it was attached to a retail store. And the retailer said, "Hey, I've got some DRC wines I want to put into our next dinner." And so we had 1969 La Tâche at probably 10 years old, probably. It was probably late 70s. Anyway, the the wine was so amazing that it really sort of changed my idea about how great Pinot Noir could be, and it was certainly a underlying element in my pursuit of Pinot through Patz and Hall and now through Maritana. But with Chardonnay, it was a really different thing. White Burgundies were great, they were just too expensive for me for the most part, and we didn't have them in one of those dinners. So the wine that really blew my mind, and this is really hilarious. There was actually two of them from California, and and neither one of these brands are what they were at the time. But the 1978 Chalon Estate bottled Chardonnay. I don't know if you've ever had anything. I've never had anything like it. It poured differently than the other wines on the table. It sort of came out much more slowly. It was amazingly intense, and not the wine that I want to make or drink today. But at the time, it was just so uh, so different and so so intense and such a incredibly exciting experience that it really made me think a lot about California Chardonnays. And the other side of it was the 1979 Acacia Winery Lake Chardonnay, which was amazing, intense, but I think better balanced than the Chalon was from '78. A little better acidity, more aromatic. It was just a lovely, lovely, lovely Chardonnay, and it really opened my eyes to the idea that California Chardonnay could compete with anybody.
I sold those for years. They got bought up and moved around.
It really, yeah, both of those have been sort of sad stories about. I don't know what the current situation. I actually had a Chalon Chardonnay not that long ago. They were pouring it by the glass at a restaurant that I was having dinner in. It was good, but nothing like what that wine was. I don't know what level of sugar they picked that stuff at in '78, but it was the thickest, richest Chardonnay I'd ever had. It made Rombauer look like beginners.
I always tell people cheat on your wine and stay loyal to your spouse because the wine you fell in love with is not the same wine many times.
Yeah, a lot of times that's true. Yeah.
You termed the phrase classic wine as a style of the 60s, 70s in an interview as the style that you enjoy. Would you say that in reference to our earlier question that the movement towards that you have kind of what I call the cocktail style of wines out there that people are picking at those high sugars, lower acids, and then there's that more classic style that you seem to be going with a lower sugar, higher acid, more rounded fat mouthfeel.
So it's kind of an interesting question because I happen to know. I mean, I happen to know some of the winemakers from the '70s, and actually earlier I met Andrei Chelichev once in my life. And if you don't know who Andrei Chelichev is, you should probably look it up. It's going to be a tricky name to spell. I'm not sure I can off the top of my head. Regardless, one of the things he said, which I thought was really fascinating, is that they used to pick their Cabernet that would go into the BV Private Reserve very high sugars, and then he said they would add Chateau Le Pump. In other words, they added water and acid back to it. It's something that's been done in California for a very long time.
Huh.
So I don't think that all of the wines from the '70s were made that way, and I'm not sure that I think some of my favorite wines probably had a bit of adjustment made to it. I mean, I start looking at the sugars. I mean, for example, Burgess has been one of my favorites from the 1970s, and if you look on their original Cabernet labels, they put the sugars at harvest, and usually it was 24.5 or higher, and then they have like 13.9 alcohol or something like that. That's not possible. So they added water, almost certainly. I mean, I wasn't there. I didn't see them do it, but it seems to me that with the chemistry that they're saying, the most likely outcome was that they added water. So I don't know. Uh, I like the wines that came out of that time a lot, and of course, those are the wines I was first introduced to. So, it's sort of like, what kind of rock and roll do you like? Well, probably the stuff you went to high school with, not necessarily the stuff that is the most current today, unless you're in high school today. The I think that so the essence of your question is correct. I mean, I want the style of wine. I really believe in single vineyard designate wines. So if you want to make a single vineyard designate wine, what you're trying to do is display the character of place. And if you're trying to display the character of place, it should not be about the winemaking. It should be about the place. So in my mind, picking the grapes so you don't have to add water and acid is the ideal place to start. Now, in certain years, you may be backed into a corner. I don't want to say I never will do anything because for me, the idea is to make a wine that's really delicious and exciting and something that people are going to want to drink on a regular basis if they can afford it. But but sort of the overarching idea that I'm shooting for is to pick these grapes, yes, at lower sugars than we probably would have even used at Patz Hall, in order to be able to not have to do a lot of winemaking additions. It's not about laziness. It's about an idea of reflecting the place. And to my mind, raisins taste like raisins. They taste like raisins wherever you get them. They're not going to have a characteristic of place. So that, and also with specific to Cabernet, there's a feeling like somehow or another, that herbaceous note that Cabernet Sauvignon has is some kind of thing that you're trying to get rid of. I mean, literally, winemakers will tell you this when you're talking to them. Yeah, well, we're really trying to get rid of that character. We don't want it to have any characteristics of herbaceousness. Well, that's a signature of Cabernet Sauvignon. So if you're going to make Cabernet Sauvignon, but you don't want it to actually taste like Cabernet Sauvignon, well, then why bother? It's pretty expensive grapes. Why not just make Merlot or Cabernet Franc or Grenache or anything else? So I actually like that. I'm not looking for super herbal Cabernet. That's not necessarily what I'm going for either. But I think that there should be a signature there. I call it bouquet garni, this kind of combination of fresh herb and dried herbs, and even some floral notes. I think that is the essence of what makes Cabernet Sauvignon different from other Bordeaux styled wines. And so I'm looking for that and encouraging that to be part of my overall flavors.
I tell people
Is that helpful?
you should have a wide spectrum of flavor. Why narrow the flavor down? I mean, I find it interesting when someone says, "I'm having a piece of venison, but I don't want that gamey taste." I'm like, "Well, you could tone it down, but why don't you
Yeah,
just dump a bunch of ketchup on it to hide it then?" I mean, the whole point of eating lamb or venison or wild game is to enjoy that little slight difference in taste.
totally agree. Yeah. Although, some of those game meats can be super gamey if it's been done by like a rookie. But it's all about the preparation of the meat. Otherwise, you can end up with really pungently strong game flavors. I've had that too. I can sort of understand if you have that experience, you might want less of it. But but I agree with you entirely. I mean, the whole point of eating a particular food is to have that flavor, not some other flavor. But here's why it's done in California, or actually wherever it's done, is because they're shooting for a particular audience and they believe that audience does not like that characteristic. So they're trying to phase it out, but at the same time, put the fancy name Cabernet Sauvignon on it so they can charge more. That's what's happening.
I kind of describe it as the mass mark. I'm not knocking the beer companies, but I'm saying it's kind of like when you do that, you're making it the Bud Miller Coors type of beer or wine to appeal to the widest spectrum as opposed to something more craft and specialized.
Yeah, it might be true. I mean, I think that most winemakers embrace the idea that every year is going to be a little different, which is really the opposite of what um, any type of brewer, including craft brewers, are trying to replicate. So that if you have their IPA, for example, to this year, and you come back next year and try it again, it tastes as close as possible to the same. But they're starting with different, beginning products. I don't think I could be wrong in this, although I've never experienced it. I don't think that wheat or barley or corn or really tastes significantly different because of where it was grown. Um, and I'm not sure that that's the point of those things either. So yes, I would say the majority of wine that's produced in the world is really not doing what I'm trying to do. It's trying to make something delicious, fresh, lively, happy, moderately expensive to less expensive. That's, it's a pyramid. I mean, and the bottom of the pyramid is wines that are at their best, drinkable and juicy and happy. And that's pretty much all you should expect from them. And that, and that's a laudable goal. I embrace people that are doing that. I think that's really a wonderful thing to do. It's just not what I want to do. And I'm really much more interested in producing wines that are really again a reflection of place, but at the very highest level of quality. And it takes a certain kind of crazy obsessiveness in order to be able to do this. And I have a really wonderful crews at both of the places I'm making wine that help me get there.